Okay, now here we are in phase two. I'm going to, of the lecture series, I'm going to talk about negotiations now. I learned all about the conflict, and now essentially we're going to talk about how to negotiate that conflict. So, what makes negotiation successful? What I always say is think of what goes into a contract. And every contract, what do you have? You have consideration, right? One of the elements of a contract is consideration, meaning one party has to give something up, one party has to gain something, and vice versa. So your book describes on page 355 that negotiation is a decision making process where two or more individuals agree on how to allocate resources, resolve competing interests, settle an issue, or determine an agreeable position. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. The second element is, the first element here is allocate resources. And I think that is the most important thing to look at. Most of the time when you're negotiating, both parties, now pay attention to this because this I really think is important. Both parties don't agree on the resources available to them. Some think they need more than others. Some think that one party is hiding the resources and than the other. And the idea is, like I said earlier, to agree to disagree is the first step, putting yourself on a level plane. So to settle an issue, you both have to decide. When I talk about resources, I'm also talking about information. You both have to decide what information is available to you. Okay? Think about that for a minute. What information is available to you? And then you start talking about how to equitably distribute that information so that both sides have an understanding of what to negotiate on those resources. So your book says it very well. Settle an issue or determine an agreeable position. Now, negotiation occurs formally and informally. Sometimes the best thing to do, even if you're in a supervisory role, you're dealing with a subordinate, a peer, or a supervisor. Somehow you have to realize that you need to be on an equal plane to settle any biases that agree between you. So we have two types of negotiation. Okay? We have distributive negotiation and integrative negotiation. Distributive, obviously, is a lot along the lines of what I just talked about. It's basically the assumption that there's a fixed amount of value that has to be distributed between the parties. If both parties remain rigid, that me type of approach, you're never going to negotiate. Again, think back to going to that leveling plane. Integrative negotiation is interest-based. When you contrast that against distributive negotiation, then values, resources, or positions are really not at template style of fixed values. So the idea is now don't just talk about the resources that you have. Both parties own have an interest in these resources, but find out how to make the most out of them. A lot of times when you have conflict, you don't really know how to distribute the resources that are available so that both parties can benefit. So you want to make more than what you think you have. So your book spells it out very well. The idea is there is a certain process that you go through when you use the integrative approach to negotiation. So take a look at that for a moment. Don't make it personal. That's the first step. Separate the individuals involved in the negotiation from the problem. Only focus on the problem. Getting personal invites lack of focus when it gets emotional. You have to back away from that. Only focus on the facts. The second thing is you focus on the interests rather than on the positions. In other words, I'm your boss, so this is what I say to do. Look at the elements revolving around the facts. Focus on that first. The third thing is look at the alternatives. We talked about this so many times already when we talked about decision making and leadership. Remain open to options that are going to make both parties gain something here. Look at the resources to maximize them so that both parties can benefit from the negotiation. And the last thing is utilize objective rather than subjective criteria. Don't use the fear element to solve the problem. Be objective, separate biases from fact, and look at how both parties can gain from very much objective points of view. So your book states that when you separate the people from the problem points, you maintain the relationship among the negotiators. You don't walk away. You make things happen because you were properly identified with the resources that were available and that you had overcome many of your biases. Look at the substance of the problem only. And then be willing to work with the other party. That's very, very important. So your book states on page 255 at the bottom, if you look at table 10.2, prior to any negotiation, negotiators representing all parties should clarify their interests, understand their position on each one of the issues. That's right. Be prepared to discuss certain line items in the negotiation. Table the ones that you disagree on and you agree to go back and talk about them. Like I said earlier, agree to disagree. And then prioritize things. What is most important to both parties? And look at how to collaborate on the resources that are available. Okay, that is the end of phase 2 of today's lecture. Reflect on that for a few minutes.